Welcome back. It's your boy Seth Garu Baxter with Makers Bar, where we're creating 1 million leaders today for tomorrow. And going along with the series that you have been exposed to in the Makers Bar of my audience, you know that I've been examining the conversation of redefining Black excellence and what that means. This is another cat that has joined us today that is an example of that definition of Black excellence. We've examined the terms of the higher 1% as examples of Black excellence, but there's also the other percentage, whether they be the 2%, 10%, that are Black excellence. And our guest today is a true example of that. We're going to go through his story of what it took as far as him being a man of color in the law profession. And then not only that, but his experience as a leader and what it took to overcome some of those obstacles. Hopefully in some of that, you'll find inspiration and conversational pieces as we go on along in our conversation. He is an attorney. He is Luke Fedlam. He is an attorney with Amundsen Davis, LLC. We are so pleased to have him here today. Luke, thank you so much for joining us, brother. How are you today?
Seth, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I am fantastic, man. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So, Luke, tell us where you come from and about your origin story.
Sure. So my origin story is really kind of interesting. I say I grew up in upstate New York. I actually was born in Iowa, and I was adopted, man. I was in foster care for a few years, and well, I take that back. Actually, I was living with my birth mother for a couple of years, and I ended up being in foster care, and then I ended up getting adopted. And so, you know, all of that, I think, as we go throughout the conversation, is a common thread in terms of kind of why I do what I do, why I love what I do, what got me to where I am today, and where I'm looking to continue to go. So, originally, grew up in upstate New York, middle school, high school, and went to Wake Forest University, went to Ohio State for law school. I have the opportunity to be a lawyer and do some fun things every day.
Well, I gotta say, you mentioned two things in there that I definitely want to address. Upstate New York, what part? I'm Albany.
Oh, okay. So I'm south. I was south of Albany. So I grew up near Monticello. So about 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours north and west of the city.
Oh, dig it. And then also being adopted, I am adopted as well.
Hey, Seth, my brother.
Right? It's so crazy. That's incredible. So I heard you and my eyes go, Well, so starting from here, upstate New York is a very interesting place, whichever portion of upstate New York, in particular to people of our persuasion. So your experience in upstate New York was like what?
Honestly, it was a great experience from the perspective of sports. I love sports. Sports had me connected. I was able to connect with classmates. I mean, you move in, new kid in school, relatively small area, small class, a lot of kids that have been together since kindergarten and things like that. I think second day of school, we played kickball. I was the last kid to get picked. But after my play the next day, I was the first kid to get picked. I mean, sports has played an integral role in my life in terms of building relationships, oftentimes being accepted. And there's a lot more to it. I'm probably distilling it down to too finite of a point, but I think that sports certainly played a significant role. I was fortunate enough to be involved in other things in the community as well as within school that I think also played a role. So it was an interesting experience growing up, again, moving there when I was going into fifth grade through high school. But sports played a big role, man.
Which sports in particular?
So I ran cross country, played basketball, and ran track. And for me, we had a very successful running program. And so we were always competing at the state championship level. And so that taught a lot to me about leadership, determination, setting goals, resetting goals, how to deal with defeat, how to deal with success. And so all of that, really created for me the opportunity to connect with a lot of folks, not just even within the school, but within the larger community, and throughout the state, just in competing with different folks.
You mentioned something. I had to write it down. Sometimes I have to write down notes as they flow. How to deal with success. Before we get to the adoption part, I'd like to be able to hear what you have to say about that. There's a challenge in having to learn to deal with success. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I'll say this, whether we're talking about success in sports, or success, in the boardroom in corporate America, it's something that in some respects you have to learn to deal with. And I would say that I may have been better in understanding how to deal with success in sports than I have in my kind of professional career in dealing with success. I find that, especially, and I'm sure we'll get to this in the context of the broader conversation, but in my career as a practicing attorney, being a partner at a large law firm, I've had success in life, but I downplay it for two reasons. I think one, because I reset new goals almost immediately and don't give myself the opportunity to celebrate the successes because I'm on to the next challenge. And probably the second reason is I think oftentimes imposter syndrome is a very real thing. And I think that oftentimes many people of color that have found success in corporate America and in other industries deal with that imposter syndrome and deal with, am I really supposed to be here? Am I really good enough? Am I all that, whatever this success, says that I am? Am I that? Should I be heard and valued, et cetera? So I think, learning to deal with success is an ongoing challenge. Learning to acknowledge success, I probably should clarify, is one of the things that certainly has been a challenge for me.
And when you say in dealing with success, I question sometimes, and the conversation comes up with colleagues of my own. I wonder if you think, is it more challenging for we as men of color to deal with imposter syndrome and success? Do we have that more innately in us due to some of the history, or is just the problem of dealing with success and imposter syndrome something that's more universal? Does it cross the boundaries of race?
I think it's hard. I think it's hard to answer that question. I think it would be hard for me to answer that question, to speak for others outside of my experience. What I can say is, especially in the practice of law, especially at law firms, and you look at large law firms in particular, the number of Black partners, the percentage of Black partners is incredibly low. Single digits, low single digits, incredibly low. So it's a challenge to even say that, that I'm constantly confident in saying, I belong here, even though I know the work I've put in, I know the things that I've done, I know the things that I've achieved, I know the things that I know, but I would be lying if I wasn't honest with your audience to say that imposter syndrome is a real thing. Now, is that something that's, that is a carryover in our DNA from times past and the history of colored people in America? Maybe that's the case. I don't know that I've researched or thought enough. It certainly seems logical to me. But to say whether or not others, others experience it or not, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is, to that young person that's listening to this podcast, that maybe is in a college classroom or a high school classroom, or maybe is fresh out of college and working and trying to figure out if they belong, you belong, right? If trying to figure out whether or not they are the leader that they thought they were, because now the world is a much bigger, harsher place. You belong. You are that leader, and you do have to have those people in your community and your village around you. And I think this podcast is a great example of that. They can both be honest with you and tell you that that you're not. It's not uncommon for you to feel the way you feel, but most certainly can encourage you to say, you absolutely are that leader that you think you are. Continue to get better, continue to strive for the best, and you'll do great things.
So tell me, is imposter syndrome something we have to get support to get out of, or is it more so a practice that we learn how to get out of ourselves? I know for me, some of the way I had support from, I remember some of the mentors I had. I was very blessed, brother, to have great mentors. Michael Criddle was one of them, who told me, Seth, we as men of color, we can easily adopt imposter syndrome. The question that we do to get ourselves out of that, and I never forget this because you're an example of that, is to repeat to ourselves, you belong.
You belong. I love it. I think, as with anything, I think it's a combination of things, right? I think most certainly there are affirmations, right? You belong is certainly one of them. And many things that we can say to ourselves to remind ourselves that we do belong. We do belong in that boardroom. We do belong in that courtroom. We do belong, right, in the C-suite of a corporation. We do belong. But at the same time, I think that there is a truly something unique and special, especially when men of color have support from other men of color. I think there are often times where we may feel that we have to carry this burden, that I shouldn't, share my challenges. I don't know that I trust people to receive with care, where I feel that maybe I'm not good enough. And so I think what comes out of being able to have honest, transparent, vulnerable conversations, in particular among men of color, in this leadership, in this, space where we may face imposter syndrome, I think that matters significantly. And I think that when you hear, and that's why I share it, right? That's why I share. People see me as a public speaker, a motivational speaker. I speak to, professional athletes regularly, college athletes, right? CEOs, general counsels, right? I do this regularly. So people say, oh, how would you have imposter syndrome? But I share that because it's real. And I share that because, yes, there are ways to overcome things, but if you don't have the ability to even acknowledge it or to share that it's something that's real, that exists, I think people then carry on believing it's just them. And it's not just you, right? It's not just you. It's much more common than you think.
I'm so curious. Some of the brothers I know that have gotten to that place and they said they've made this self-conversation where they said, I belong. Do they continue to deal with those challenges all along? So you've reached a certain plateau of success, and I don't know, plateau might not be the best way to describe it, but you reached a certain level of success. Does it stop?
Seth, I don't know that it really stops. I would say that throughout my life, I've experienced it in different ways because, and here's why I think it maybe doesn't stop, is because if you are that person that is that leader, the leader doesn't reach necessarily a plateau. The leader reaches maybe one summit and then goes to the next and to the next. And I think that's where you will constantly find yourselves in more challenging rooms, more challenging, opportunities, right? To continue to stretch and pull on your leadership ability. And that's the win. I think that's why I oftentimes have struggle with acknowledging success, because when I've achieved one thing, I want to go achieve the next and the next and the next. And that means that I'm surrounding myself then with other people that are continuing to challenge me, that are continuing to maybe just impress me with their ability such that I want to get better. And I think it's the notion of imposter syndrome to me is a sign of success. It's a sign of, if you find yourself always in a room where it's just like, oh, I know I'm smarter than everybody in this room. I know, right? You're in the wrong rooms. So let's be honest about this. You want to find yourself challenged by other people in the room. The key is it's okay. It's okay to feel challenged by others in the room. Just know that you belong. I know, and I remind myself of that I belong in this room. I just was in a meeting this morning with the heads of some different nonprofit organizations and CEOs of some well-established companies working through a particular community issue. And I just, even just in sitting in there, sometimes I can't believe the rooms that I'm in. But when you're in those rooms, you don't just get to be an innocent bystander. If be engaged in the room, right? Lead in that room. That doesn't mean you have to dominate every conversation, but most certainly you belong, and you're in the room to lend your voice. So lend your voice.
You bring up such an interesting point. I tell you, I worked in a nonprofit for a long time, But when I first had a strong leadership position as a senior program director, I never will forget this. So I was about 23, 24, and the executive director promoted me to this position. And I was a single full-time dad at the time, full-time, raising my son. And he's the first board meeting with all the main chieftains of this program. I was the youngest one. All of them, the youngest one in there had me still about 12 years. And it was only two men of color, And they had achieved their certain success as well. But I'm coming in there as this 23-year-old, 24-year-old feeling, how did I even get here? I was talking politics with the executive director, and he said, Seth, Guru, Guru came later. Seth, I want you to go into this room and you're going to tell them you're the director of this program, and they're going to try and make sure that you don't feel good, but I feel confident in you. And this was one of my mentors, Dave Powell. I'll never forget it. And I walk into the boardroom and I'm thinking, these cats are not going to listen to me, man. How did I even get here? I totally felt an imposter thing. But you said you don't have time to get comfortable with the change. You have to go in with your expertise and what you researched and what you studied and go in. And I remember going in there with that trepidation and that imposter syndrome, but you kind of go into that stuff where you're like, I'm built for this.
Built for this. No,
I'm
that's
built
exactly
for this.
Right. Mm-hmm. That is.
Please.
Well, no, you're spot on. And I think that's where the self-talk, it matters. And I think for any leader, I mean, listen, one of my first leadership experiences that I remember thinking, what am I doing? Was when I was in the military. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, as an infantry officer, after having gone to
Thank you for your service. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I just remember the first time I got in front of my platoon as a platoon leader, and there were 44 at the time, men, right, all looking at me as leader. And I had the least amount of experience, likely, of just about everybody in that platoon, right? But what does that mean as a leader, though, right? It challenges you. But I remember thinking very specifically, I'm going to lean on my squad leaders. I'm going to lean on my platoon sergeant who had 20 plus years of experience. I'm going to glean as much as I can from these folks so that I can consume that. And then in my leadership position, take that information and then make a decision, right? Because ultimately, I think it's important that we always remember what leadership is. In my definition, right? We all have different definitions. My definition of leadership is taking a group of people or an organization somewhere that they wouldn't go but for your involvement, right? And so thinking about whatever that is that you're adding then to the table, like that's what leadership is. And you belong. You're built for this. Let's go. You got me all fired up, Seth. Come on now.
Well, we get ready to go there, Kat, because I'm just so curious. Because, again, in talking about Black excellence, I look at you and I'm just so glad to be in this particular interview with you, because I think there's several layers of things that we can discuss as far as what that means. So I appreciate it. What I'm also curious about, growing up as a man of color and knowing that this is going to be your journey, when you start to say, I know law is that issue, did you have issues or questions? What can a man of color do in law? Did you have challenges that were facing you as far as, because we've not always had the most success in embracing that law can work on our behalf. And I'm always curious about our journey when we do, in relative speaking to the imposter syndrome, going into law, you're not just defending people of color. Some of their law journey might be that, but in that, there is the journey that I'm an attorney, and if the law hasn't always been on the side. Did you face any of those challenges where you had to say, I'm going into this career knowing this, or what was that journey like for you?
Yeah, it was interesting, and on a few different levels. And first, I'll say I just remember as a kid kind of making that decision that I wanted to be a lawyer. And the reason why, I remember clear as day when in 1988, when Jesse Jackson was running for president of the United States, I remember thinking to myself, we got Ebony magazine at home. I'm cutting out pictures of this Black man. I didn't know anything about Jesse Jackson, but I was 10 years old at the time, and cutting out pictures and putting it on my wall, thinking like a Black man can be the president of the United States, right? Like, and so I said, you know what? I want to be the president of the United States. That's the top. That's what I want to do. And so I did research and found out that there were so many, past presidents who were lawyers. And I thought that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a lawyer. So fast forward, the work that I do is not in the courtroom. So I am a sports lawyer. I really act as like general counsel, general legal counsel to primarily professional athletes, sports related businesses, and now because of name, image, and likeness, some college student athletes as well. And I did that because my career started in finance before I went to law school. And in that financial world, I ended up getting recruited to a sports management firm. And I was working with athletes on the financial side and found out that, first of all, so many of the athletes that were my clients looked like us, right? Men of color. And I saw them get taken advantage of left and right. And I wanted to do something about that. And so I started off on the financial side and realized quickly that I really wanted to go to the legal side to be able to provide real legal protections. Because when we think about this, and sports has kind of always been one way in which we as African Americans have been able to elevate. And what you'll find is that so many of these athletes have such a unique and special opportunity to make a positive impact for themselves, their families, and their communities through sport. But oftentimes we're targets of being taken advantage of. And so for me, I was so focused on the clientele that I wanted to work with and protect that I just didn't allow the systems of our country's legal and judicial system and the impact on our people in particular stop me in any way. For me, it was very much a focus on, I know the clientele that I want to work with. And, I've been fortunate and blessed that I've been able to work with that clientele throughout my career. And now that is such a primary focus of the work that I do every single day. And it is to not only protect from a legal perspective, the athletes that I get to work with, but also provide the education necessary so that they can become informed consumers of this business that happens around them. And so often they're taken advantage of because they don't have the education, knowledge, or understanding of how to navigate things that are oftentimes the first time that they've ever experienced it, the first time they've ever experienced making a private business investment, the first time they've ever experienced doing a real estate deal, the first time they've ever experienced hiring an agent, hiring a financial advisor, a marketing person to manage and work for them, when oftentimes so many athletes don't even realize that it's like the agent's working for you, you're the CEO. So for me, kind of to get back to the heart of your question, I never saw the way in which our American judicial system has so historically treated Black people within our society as a stumbling block. I've looked at it as one of my favorite lawyers of all time, Charles Hamilton Houston, right? Former dean of Howard's Law School, trained up a generation of lawyers, including Thurgood Marshall and others, right, to combat and go against, separate but equal doctrine, Plessy versus Ferguson, to ultimately get us to the place of Brown versus Board of Education, desegregation, et cetera. And when I look at it, I've always seen these examples of Black lawyers that have been able to change our systems. And I would say that was in, Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, right? Charles Hamilton Houston doing his work in the late 30s, 40s, right? Before his passing in the early 50s. And to me, we're now 70 years later and having to come back to some of these same things. But this is why, now I'm really fired up. This is why, in my opinion, I do a lot of conversation with young attorneys. I try to make myself available and have these conversations. And I ask the question oftentimes, who in here likes a good lawyer joke, right? And, every now and then people are going to raise their hand and all this. And I say, I don't like them. I don't like lawyer jokes. And I don't like lawyer jokes because this industry, this profession has fought for equal rights. This profession has drafted legislation. right? This profession has done the work for women to have a right to vote. This profession has done the work to allow for us to trust the products that we consume every day, et cetera. Right? This is a profession that we have to protect and fight for, and not allow become the butt of jokes. Because when we start to think about, you see, I'm deciding if I'm going there or not, right? When we start to think about some of the challenges that we're faced with today, our legal profession and the independence of our legal profession matters now more than ever.
You know, I got to tell you something, Brother Lou. The eloquency of what you made that argument, I think more people need to hear that, because you do have the unfortunate jokes of the lawyer profession, ambulance chasers, money getters, that kind of thing. But I don't think people have spent enough time to say it is this profession that has established a number of the civil liberties that we enjoy now. And I gotta say, that's changed my perspective, because I had not heard that, although I have a lawyer in the family. And in addition to that, lawyers of the kids I worked with. So I'm so glad that you said that. That realigned my thinking. Now, in particular, to the type of law that you do, and I'd like to really highlight some of this, because we hear the stories, Luke, as far as our sports athletes who get taken advantage of a great deal. In particular, our men of color in sports who are athletes get taken advantage of. In your experience, what are we doing about that? And I don't know. I shouldn't say I don't know. I don't expect you to have all the answers, but why is that happening? What's happening where men of color who are extremely successful in their profession, they're extremely talented, why are they still getting taken advantage of? And then lawyers like yourself, who are the good attorneys, who are doing the good work in there, how is it in today's day and age? Well, I think both things exist. I want to backtrack, because I do think a number of our young men have gotten smarter about entrepreneurship, which is what MakerSpar is about. So a number of our athletes have definitely gotten smarter on their own game, and they have an entrepreneurial spirit. But in those who are getting cheated out of their money or don't have proper representation, where do you see that going? Is it that attorneys like yourself in the field are now doing more preventative care to protect their clients in that way? Or what's happening with our athletes that they don't know, and they just hurry up and sign this deal, and they don't seek the advice of an attorney? What's happening with that when we hear they met this girl and now she's taking all their money? Uncle Shay Shay, we know that's coming up. Don't smile, Luke. I didn't say that. I was trying to say it and be serious, because we don't wish him any harm or anything.
Sure,
Luke.
It's real. It's real.
And so, in those situations, what's happening that they're not fully protected? Where's the missing piece?
Yeah, they're being taken advantage of from a very young age. We as an industry are failing our young athletes, because, and when I say we as an industry, I mean that there's a lot of blame, if we want to cast blame, to go around. And what I mean by that is, let's think about this for a second. We reward an athlete to be when they're hyper focused on their sport, right? And even at the youngest age, Pop Warner football, AAU basketball, whatever it may be, we want that athlete to be all in sports. We will make adjustments academically. We will make adjustments scheduling wise to get them to that place where they are incredibly focused, so that we as coaches can win, as schools can have championship teams. Now let's take it to the college level. And I wrote an op-ed piece in the Columbus Dispatch. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I just wrote an op-ed in the Columbus Dispatch. I'll send it to you if you want to include it in the show notes. Right?
Absolutely.
That literally talks about how I think many of our colleges, universities are failing our college student athletes. Schools want the best out of their athletes. Let's think about this for a second. Think about how much travel time there is during March Madness. Think about, when you have schools like USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, right? That's not because, these schools align with the academic, institutions, et cetera, et cetera. It's because it's a money play, right? It's because there's so much money in college sports that we want to maximize that opportunity. We're paying coaches $100 million contracts. We're paying some coaches to tens of millions of dollars not to coach and to sit out and get a paycheck. I mean, there's a significant amount there, but think about what we do with the athlete. We tell the athlete what classes to schedule, right? So that they can still make sure that they don't miss any practice time, right? We tell them when to practice, what to eat, handle their nutrition, make sure that they're, traveling when we tell them to travel, right? We do all of these things so that they can focus on their sport and do extremely well in their sport. And we are missing the opportunity of talking to them about understanding contracts, understanding budgeting and finance, understanding contracts, understanding how do you navigate this business that's happening around you? How do you navigate taxes from an NIL perspective if you're a college student athlete making money through name, image, and likeness? We are missing the opportunity to truly prepare and equip them for life. Think about this. If we have, like I said, I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of professional athletes. I was just with the Detroit Lions rookies earlier, or I guess late last week. I'll be with Texans rookies later this week and some other teams and in the coming weeks. And I will tell athletes, imagine you have an average career. I mean, you're talking about 3 years, 3.5, 4 years max in football. So if you're 21 years old and you just entered the league and you have an average career, you're in there till you're 25. So these lessons, when you first start getting money, these lessons around budgeting, around managing the advisors around you, around holding those advisors accountable, around understanding taxes and all finance and all of this stuff, and understanding that my risk that I'm taking is on the field. It shouldn't be unnecessary, uncompensated risk within my portfolio. Understanding these things, this is critical for these young people. So when we don't do that at the youngest of ages, and we don't do that through the opportunities that name, image, and likeness presents us to be able to do that, when we don't do that, we end up with athletes who get taken advantage of by people because they don't know any better and it's not their fault.
It's so interesting because we just hear about it often. You hear about the successes, but it seems to be those who get taken advantage of. That story gets out there and it just stays. And I'm just always curious how to do that. And so it's not their fault. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that young athletes make when they first sign that big contract and they don't get to talk to a quality attorney like yourself, what happens?
Yeah, well, oftentimes they end up signing on to something that they just didn't realize that they signed on to, or they gave up rights that they didn't realize that they gave up. And I found myself frequently being in the position of having someone contact me, hey, I signed this contract. Can you help me get out of it? All right. And it's so much easier to negotiate a contract and the terms of that contract on the front end before you sign it than after you've lost your leverage and have already signed that contract. And now we're trying to figure out ways to get you out of that contract. But what happens? What happens is somebody signed a contract where some recent examples, somebody signed a contract where it ends up being a 3-year contract where they've agreed to pay a certain amount to a business manager for the totality of those 3 years. And that business manager hasn't done anything for them. And now they got to figure out how to get out of it. They sign on to a contract, and this was a public story and I'm not involved, so I can share it just because it's public information, right? Of a player that signed a contract in college thinking they were signing just a traditional name, image, and likeness deal. But ultimately they signed away 15% of their all of their future football related earnings, right? And that after they signed a contract, a second round NFL contract, right, that 15% equated over $1 million, right? So these are things that are happening where an athlete's giving up their intellectual property rights without compensation in perpetuity, and they don't understand or recognize that. The thing is that the thing that athletes primarily care most about in any contract is, what am I getting paid, and what do I have to do to get that payment, right? What do I have to do? Sign autographs, make appearances, post on social, whatever those things are. Those two things are usually included on like the first page of a contract, right? And so What do you think is included in the next 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 pages? Right? That's what I care most about. So like I said, I tell players all the time, I'm not an agent. I'm not out there to try to go and find you money. My job is to be your independent, qualified, and unbiased legal counsel to help make sure that you understand that if you sign this, this is what you're signing away. This is what you're giving up. I want to make sure that you understand what indemnification is and what that indemnification provision means to you. I want you to understand the limited license or full license that you're giving to your name, image, and likeness to a third party. I want you to understand what the term of a contract, how long a contract is, why that matters to you. I want you to understand that when you look at the compensation, the services you're being provided, that you're providing to someone else, and the length of the contract all fit together to help you be able to make a decision as to whether this is a good contract for you or not. My goal every single day is to help make sure that you understand what is going in front of you, not just that you've maybe read it or skimmed it, and not that my goal isn't to make you a sports lawyer, a contract lawyer. My goal is to make sure that you at least understand it so that you start to understand the things that you should be asking for before you even get to a contract. That's negotiation. That's power. That's leverage.
Before you get to the contract, that's the primary thing.
Yeah. I've got a client. I share this with players all the time. Got a client, used to play in the NFL. He's in broadcasting now. And I share this story because I love the way he said it. He told me one day, he was like, Luke, I was reviewing a deal for him. He's like, Luke, I get presented deals all the time. He was like, I don't want to do a deal that I get presented. I want to do a deal that I have to fight to go get myself. Right. And the lesson there is, so oftentimes we are targets, especially like athletes of means and of influence. They are targets for people trying to pitch them all the time. But if you think about it, what is it that you want to invest in? What is it that you want exposure to? What experience do you want? Those are the things. Think through that and then go find and negotiate an opportunity for yourself, as opposed to just taking something that somebody presents you. Because oftentimes athletes feel like when I get presented it, they told me this is what it is, so I got to take it as it is. No,
that's what I hear a lot.
That, yeah, you can negotiate that. Last thing I'll say on that point. You know, a lot of times people will ask, you know, the barbershop talk, right? We'll get in this whole debate about Jordan or LeBron, right? Who's the real GOAT? Who's better?
We know this for years, bro.
All this for years. And I'll say this, whenever I get involved in that conversation, I always say this, man, they're just different. They're different, and their impact on the sport has just been different, both incredible, right? Well, Jordan's impact was the globalization of basketball, right? And if you think about it, Jordan did not want to get involved in politics, right? He was very clear about that because he said they wanted him to support a Democratic candidate for something. He said, hey, Republicans buy shoes too. So he was not involved in politics, right? And at the time, this notion of endorsements, endorsement income, and things like that was still relatively new. But he was the globalization of basketball, right? When you look at LeBron has been very focused on being involved socially, being involved from an entrepreneurial perspective. And he changed the game from the perspective of truly helping athletes to realize you can have ownership in opportunities. You don't have to simply take what somebody is presenting to you. And so these are the things, right? These are the things that make them wildly different in terms of when they played the game, but both having a massive impact on the game. So when we think about it, the business side of sports, I mean, both of them great business folks. But during their play, while they were playing, LeBron has been phenomenal at managing and balancing the business of sports with his success on the court as well.
I'm curious, would you say because there was a small span of time where we had a huge technological advancement in social media between the two, did that play a role in it?
I think it certainly played a role, and I think it played a role for a couple reasons. Let's think about this for a second. The summer of 2020, sports pretty much comes to a screeching halt, right? We find ourselves at home, working from home, or what have you. And when they, whatever it was, ESPN or Netflix, whomever, right, pushed up the release of The Last Dance, right? The whole documentary series on Michael Jordan. And everybody watched, right? Everybody watched. And first of all, for those who don't know, I love shoes. I love sneakers, right? I'm a Jordan guy. And so I I made sure that I had a different pair of Jordans on every episode that dropped, right? When I'm watching it, just because I felt like I felt like I was going somewhere, even though going somewhere was literally my living room, right? But I'll say this. What was fascinating about that documentary is that we got it now, right? You know, whatever it was, 20 plus years later. Now we know everything about athletes, right? Because of social media. Because, you know, we think about Players Tribune started so that athletes could tell their story, right? Social media exists and players can tell their story. They're not reliant solely upon the media to tell the story and get it out there. During Jordan's era, it was very much that, right? It was very much whatever the media shared, that's what the story was that was out there. And so when we got to see some of this behind the scenes that we hadn't seen before, that drew people in. Because now today's athlete, I mean, we see so much from high school, middle school on up. Right? Players are able to talk in their own voice, be able to talk directly to their fans, be able to share what they want to share and put out there. Yes, the media still plays a role in telling the story, but athletes certainly have the opportunity to be the front runner in telling their story in the way in which they want to tell their story. And LeBron has done a very good, his team around him have done a very good job with that.
It seems like there's definitely a lot more ownership, even though we still have the stories, as I mentioned in this particular question, that how they still get it taken advantage of. But there's also the younger men and women who are getting involved in sports. They definitely have a stronger sense of business acumen. And that seems, I definitely have noticed that as well, as far as let me get an attorney, or they have a plan. I've also seen some of the younger ones, they have a plan. I'm going to buy real estate. I'm going to open up this, that sort of thing. So are you still seeing some of that where the younger folks, they have somewhat a vision of what they want to get as far as legal representation to make generational wealth? Are you seeing some of that as well in some of the clients with the younger ones? And then maybe I'll even ask you this, Luke, are you seeing some resistance to the older guard that didn't plan as well as some of these younger cats are?
So here's the interesting thing. I am absolutely seeing younger athletes that have a vision for what they want to do. The challenge with that is that oftentimes that positions them in a way to make them primed for being taken advantage of. When you have young athletes that say, I'm going to do real estate. I got 7 deals I can get you into real estate right now. I hear, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so now people have found ways, right? There have been fraudsters and those bad actors, you know, for since the beginning of time, right? And they find ways to play on the desires of athletes. I mean, Dwight Howard, right, thought that he invested in buying a WNBA team, $7 million, to a person that had already been in prison twice, and then ultimately just took advantage and took the money, right? I mean, to millions of dollars. Yeah, there are athletes left and right that get taken advantage of. Oftentimes, when you articulate that this is what I want to do, this is what my vision is, if you don't have that right qualified team, vetted team, right, around you, sometimes having that vision can be almost more dangerous because people will hear that and find ways to try to take advantage of that. A lot of times athletes will talk about faith and family, and people will hear that and then will take advantage of that and use faith and use family as ways to try to get athletes to make certain investments, to do certain things, make certain decisions. And that is another way that athletes get taken advantage of.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. I don't think I've heard that nuance that way. And I don't think people have seen that or noticed that that's one of the disadvantages of airing out some of your passions and so forth. And going along those lines, you know, so I'm an adopted person. And if you don't mind, can we examine some of being adopted?
Let's.
Thank you. So share your adoption experience, and then I'll ask the question. Maybe I can flesh it out.
Sure. So I was born. My biological mother had a boyfriend who was not my father, and so that was the cause of a lot of, we'll just say, challenge in their relationship. My biological mother, she has some mental health challenges, and so found herself frequently taken advantage of. And And so she tried to take care of me to the best of her ability. And so I lived with her for the first kind of 2.5, 3 years of my life. It just wasn't working out. And I ended up being put into foster care by social services. And was in foster care for about a year or so, and then was adopted from there. Yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe, I don't know what, that's some of the details. You know, this is one of those things where we could probably have a 10-hour long podcast conversation about that. I think that I tried to give you enough of the highlights along the way. I will say this, and then I'm happy to answer your question around this. I will say that I am proud of who I am, and my adoption experience, and really I would say my pre-adoption experience, my foster care experience, and my adoption experience have all made me who I am today. And with that, it has made me that person that has a chip on his shoulder, a person that has felt like I have to prove myself, someone that says I am going to outwork anyone and everyone, because I feel like I have this insatiable desire to want to succeed and make it happen. And I acknowledge that. And I acknowledge that my adoption experience has had that effect on me, because that's who I am. And I try to acknowledge it as frequently as I can, because without it being managed or acknowledged, I think it could get out of hand. And I try to use it as a motivator, as opposed to a potentially a paralyzer, or even conversely as something that maybe drives me kind of in a way that gets out of control.
So did you have a relationship with your birth mother during the time you were with her?
So I was too young to remember that.
Okay.
However, what is crazy is that my senior year of college, I ended up meeting, not really for the first time, obviously, but meeting for the first time in my cognizable kind of, life, my biological mother and her 6 sisters, for like kind of like the first time again when I'm 21 years old, and still have a relationship, have a relationship with her today.
Yeah, interesting to share that, because I am adopted as well. Loved my mom who raised me. I don't know her as anything other than a mom. And then plus she slapped me in the head if I did try and say anything other than that.
Right.
And she was a personality, my mom. When I had the opportunity, I was about 24 when I met my biological mother. I had not known her because when I was adopted at birth. But we have the greatest relationship. It's going on 28 years now. My biological mother, she's awesome.
Yep.
And it's so interesting that we, as those who are adopted, and if you've had the blessing of finding those who were a part of your biological history, there's an interesting thing, and I'm bringing it to the question with you, where I found there's little idiosyncrasies that I see sometimes that we have that I can't attribute to my parents who raised me. Though my parents who raised me, that's my mom and dad. There's no question. My family who raised me, we don't even know just adoption is. But I see certain things because I also met my biological father. And we in this adoption community, when you find those little nuances, I find that fascinating. Did you find any of those traits as you developed your relationship with her?
Absolutely, yes.
What is that about? What is that about, Luke?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the broader conversation of nature versus nurture, and I think that it's not a either or. I think it's a both and. I think that there are certainly things that in my parents who adopted me that I certainly have taken right from them as they've kind of nurtured me right throughout. but there are, and you said it right, idiosyncrasies, just little idiosyncrasies
Yeah.
that are certainly attributable to my biological family and the nature side of things that just happen to be, deep coded in our DNA that, randomly when I first, one of the first times I spent a significant period of time with some of my biological aunts, I love mixing mayonnaise and ketchup and dipping my fries in it. And they were like,
I do too.
What?
How'd that happen, man?
Right. I mean, it's just like they saw me do that and they were like, what? Are you kidding us? Right. I mean, there are certain things that I think, and as you can probably attest to this too, right? For someone who's adopted, whenever you have those moments where you see, oh my gosh, like this came from there or what have you, like, it's a special moment. There are, a handful of others that we don't have time to get into, but I think it's nature and nurture.
I think there's a big part of that. And I value the relationship I have with my birth mother. Like, we are super duper cool. And I just have really appreciated the part she's played in my life, as well as my birth father. He's passed away since. I think the biggest thing for me was finding out my birth father was Caucasian. That was a different situation for me because I was raised by an extremely powerful, strong Black man who was gentlemanly, and he was the bomb. My dad was incredible. And so in finding those little idiosyncrasies, that has been the journey. Now, in your profession, I'm just curious, your dad who raised you and or biological dad, were there any similarities in the trail or the path that they followed in their careers? Did you find similar to the trail or path that you followed?
So I don't know who my biological father is, right? Don't have any of that information. My father who raised me, no. And I think, my father who raised me was, he was in the Navy for a few years, and then he was a pastor, along with my mother who raised me too, both pastors, small towns, small churches. And so, I went this legal route, and I think, I mean, really, it was something that I think they kind of knew I was going to do. But when I then said, like, I'm going to do corporate law and I'm going to work with athletes, I think there was this kind of, shock and maybe a bit of disappointment, because there were comments of like, why wouldn't you work with, the, downtrodden and the people who need and all that. And I'm like, at the end of the day, like, there are plenty of great lawyers doing great things, but everyone, right? Everybody needs assistance. And I looked at it like, I have identified this need that athletes have. I've identified the fact that athletes can have a significant positive impact on their families, on their communities, and they need that protection. And they need the legal counsel to do that, to be able to take my corporate background and work with nonprofits that are out here doing great things, on the corporate side, so that they can continue to function and make an impact to their, targeted communities. Like, to me, there was no question. So yeah, I mean, I think, as you kind of find this intersection around this, adoption story and kind of professional career, I feel like in my professional journey post-college, like, that's one thing that my parents, it was never a question, right? My parents who raised me, there was never a question. You're going to college. That was a no-brainer. Anything beyond that, whatever you do. But my experience kind of post-college has certainly been 100% of my own making. Now, I say that, somewhat half-heartedly, because obviously you have mentorship along the way and you have others that help, that impact your journey. But from a parental perspective, I've made my own, own choices. And I feel like in some respect that goes back to what we talked about earlier in being adopted and feeling that I'm out here on my own, and I've got to make the decisions, to protect myself and to set myself up for success.
I think that's very true. And around that, I also had the great opportunity to have incredible mentors that were a big part of that process. And again, my dad who raised me was incredible. And then my uncles on my biological side, you mentioned meeting your mother's sisters. My uncles on my biological side, I adore them. They're incredible men. Having the opportunity to meet them and have them be a part of my current life has been a blessing all around. And I find even in them some of the blessing of that. Now, switching gears a little bit, please tell us about your nonprofit. Tell us about your nonprofit organization. Luke. What that pause.
So I don't have my own nonprofit. So I'm not.
I'm sorry. I did not mean your own nonprofit. Forgive me. Working with nonprofits.
Yes. Okay.
That's it. Forgive me, Luke.
No worries. So yeah, so I was like, oh my gosh, I had to think real quick. I was like, wait, because I have this idea. I just haven't launched it yet. I'm like, wait a second.
That was me.
How would he know that? He really is the people whisperer. Like, wow, I didn't even say anything.
You know what? In my notes, I said nonprofit. So forgive me. I know you work with for-profits and nonprofits. And so forgive me. That was my mistake. So please tell us about your work with nonprofits.
Sure. So from a legal perspective, I work as legal counsel, general counsel to some nonprofits, providing the legal expertise that they need when they need it. I think more directly, I also serve. So I serve on the board of directors for the National Youth Advocate Program, NYAP.org. NYAP is an organization that really works with kids going through foster care, adoption, family reunification, and supporting all the various stakeholder groups in that ecosystem. And they're a national organization that I'm just so fortunate to be a part of their board of directors and their leadership. I serve on the board of directors for the Columbus Clippers minor league baseball team, which I think, again, yes, it's within my kind of career space, but at the same time, too, it is here in Columbus, it's a community gem for family entertainment, a staple in kind of just that family experience here in our community. I serve on the board of trustees for Capital University, which is a small D3 liberal arts university here in Columbus, Ohio. Again, just, I care deeply about education and making sure that people are getting the education, to be able to go out and win in life. I serve on the board of directors for Rising Media Stars, which is an organization started by a good friend and college friend of mine, LaChina Robinson, who's an ESPN analyst for women's basketball. And she has a nonprofit that's focused on young Black women wanting to break into the broadcasting, sports broadcasting space. And so I look through this lens of protecting others when I think about where I kind of contribute my time. I think, I've oftentimes called myself a protector of possibilities. I want to protect the possibilities that other people have. And so whether that's from a legal perspective in the work that I do, whether that's a community perspective from the nonprofits and organizations that I support and get involved with, or from a family perspective, right? A 15-year-old son, 10-year-old daughter, 14-year-old son who's about to be 15, 10-year-old daughter. And I want to make sure that I protect all the opportunities that they have in life as well. So that really is kind of the foundational perspective. How do I protect others? Because I think deep down inside, when I was a kid, I wanted somebody to protect me. And so I think now, I've got this opportunity to do that professionally, personally, and from a community perspective, and I want to make the most of it.
Community advocacy, that's a big part of your love and appreciation for the law as well.
Absolutely. There is, again, it goes back to me, the beauty of the legal profession. And I think a big part of that is that community advocacy. I think that we all owe it to our communities to be actively engaged. We really do. I mean, it's our community. I mean, that's what always drew me to politics. Even though I'm not an elected official, I decided to kind of go down a different path for this phase of my life. Who knows what the future may bring.
So I was going to ask you that next, bro, about your political aspirations.
I mean, you never know, right? I mean, that is such a political answer, right? But I mean it from like the true essence of that. I do not know. To me, I look at it. I knew and know that I don't want to be a career politician. And so what that means to me then is it has to be the right opportunity at the right time. And I truly believe that I would be the right voice for that opportunity. And if that's not the case, then I'm not going to be involved in politics. If that opportunity all comes together and in the right ways, then I will. And so, but I think when you look back at our forefathers and you look back at the political history of our country, political participation was a sacrifice. Political participation was a sacrifice. And I think all too often we now are in a place where many view it not as a sacrifice, but as their gain of power, their gain of resources, their gain of what makes their life better, as opposed to necessarily what makes life better for all of us. But just because you're not involved in politics as an elected official doesn't mean you can't be involved in that community advocacy and advocating for our communities. I talk to people all the time about how critically important it is for any election to vote up and down the ballot, for any election to understand that judges, county auditors, city council people, right? These are mayors. These are all people that directly impact our day-to-day lived existence. So much more oftentimes than the federal side. And yet these local elections are oftentimes elections that get overlooked. My wife and I are throwing a fundraiser for a friend of ours who's on the Board of Education for where we live. We want them to win. They are working every single day to help provide a better educational opportunity for our kids. Like that, we've got to be involved in our communities. We've got to advocate, and whether you have kids or not. This is where we live. Right? Wherever your community is, wherever you live, like there is opportunity to make an impact, to sacrifice for the greater good for somebody else.
I couldn't think of a better way to bring that to a close. I know your time is extremely valuable. And I got to say, Luke, this was such a pleasure, my friend. And for all of those young men and women of color and not of color, just who are interested in the law profession, this was very insightful as to your particular brand of law. So we thank you so much for joining us today on my show.
Seth, man, thank you so much for having me. Keep doing what you're doing, and anything I can do to help in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out.
I will totally not. And I thank you so much for just bringing light and inspiration and advice to us. And you know what, brother, please accept our support and our love and our prayers. And know that there is a number of brothers out here who support and really look up to what you're doing. We thank you so much for doing it.
I really appreciate that. My fellow adopted brother, let's go.
That's right. That's right. And then, hey, so the exclusive, when you choose to run for president, know you coming right here.
There it is. Let's get it.
Well, people, thank you so much for Luke Fedlam being here with us today. And as you know, the Lovevolution is the revolution that we're all looking for. Create a revolution of love. Bring some more peace and inspiration to other people that you're encountering today, and know that we are here supporting you. Luke Fedlam, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're looking forward to all the great things and when you come back on our show.
Thank you, Seth. Take care.
You too, sir. Take good care. Thank you, brother.